Welcome to another edition of Real Talk, Straight Talk. I'm your host, Colin Caleb, aka DJ Huggy B. On my left, Dr. Wallace. How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Glad to have you on the show. I've been trying to get you since December.
Yes.
So I'm grateful that you finally made it. And you know what? It's good because we're part of Black History Month, so I think I got you at the right time.
All right. Glad to be here.
Before we go any further, let me say a big shout out to all our sponsors and supporters, starting off, of course, with the Wayne Community Center where we are shooting. So big shouts once again to Pastor Thomas and the crew. Got to talk about Paradise Bar and Grill, Jiggy and the guys over there. Up Like 7 Barbershop. I have to know that I think they won an award or something close to that. So big shouts to Up Like 7 Barbershop. Have to say much love to Natalie and everybody over at RBC. Can never forget Steven and everybody over at Pride. Got to go out of town for a minute. Ottawa 613 Rhythm Movements Community Association. They've always been with us. And, of course, Soul Kitchen Radio out in Hamilton. Big shouts to Big John doing great things for reggae music. I'm going to say it's Canada's #1 reggae music station. So if you like your culture, if you like your reggae, Soul Kitchen Radio coming out of Hamilton, you can catch them online. Now, so many things going on in London for Black History Month. So I'm going to start with the London Black History Coordinating Committee. They had their grand opening, I believe it was last Saturday. So congratulations to Leroy and everybody, to Silence, to Christina, to, of course, Carl. A big reason for this. Big shouts again to Carl. They've got a bunch of things going on for the whole month. So people, if you live in the London area, even if you don't live in the London area, I want you to go to London Black History Coordinating Committee, see what they're doing. Also, the London Library. They're involved with a few things. I happen to have been at a show, took the kids to something there last Saturday. I saw you there.
I was there.
All right. So, and that's where I twisted his arm to get him on the show, right? I got to make things up.
Track me down.
Yeah, I got to make things up. Not that I actually booked you, but it's all right. Great things going on. They do have a few more events going on for the month, so check out the London Library. And that's the what's it called? The Central Branch, right? Mm-hmm. Weebridge Community Center. I got to look at my notes. I actually have these notes here. Weebridge Community Center is doing some, or community services, I believe it is. They're doing some stuff as well. I want you to go to weebridge.org, I believe, and you'll see what they're doing. Now, we had a young lady on the show a few weeks ago. Her name was Nazra. She was a business student at Western, but she was also part of the conservatory. And she sent me something, and I'm going to try to find it here, because on the 25th of this month, the conservatory is doing a presentation. And, she came on and she was talking about getting more Black kids involved in all the arts, the astronomy, the astrology, and just being part of the conservatory, and I think it's called the Hugh Chrome Conservatory. So just give me a minute, and I'm gonna find the right thing because I had it, I lost it. Me and these phones, we just don't get along. But like I said, it's coming up on the 25th. Now, as I continue to look, of course, I pop up on our flyer. I'm looking at this smiling face beside me. Dr. Kenneth Wallace. Pronounce your other names because I have such a hard time.
Sure. So my indigenous name from the Choctaw side is Abocha Achihoa, which means the abode or the dwelling place of Jehovah.
Okay. Say it again. I just want you to say it. Slow it down for those that don't have that tongue.
Yeah. So Abocha, like abode. So
Yeah.
Abocha
Yeah.
Achihoa, like Jehovah.
Okay.
So the abode of Jehovah.
Aboa,
Aboa Achihoa.
Aboa Achioa. Well, I think that's close. I'm gonna give you a C.
I
plus.
appreciate it.
The beautiful thing about having you on this show and in this month is that there are other aspects of history that we haven't really explored, right? The indigenous side, especially in terms of the U.S. and that's where you're from. So I want you to take us back a little bit. Take me through your genealogy. Tell me about your tribe. Is it a tribe?
Yeah.
Yeah, am I saying it right? Yeah, tribe and yeah.
Yeah, so my ancestors come from two different sides. So my black ancestors were brought over from Africa, from the continent, as slaves to the U.S. And we were able to trace them back through Ancestry.com and all those new things that will test your DNA and all of that. They came from the Bantu tribes in Western Africa, so particularly around Benin and Togo. Which we're honored to be able to know that because a lot of folks for generations weren't able to tell where they were from.
Yes.
And then on the indigenous side, on my mom's side, I'm Choctaw. And so that's a people group from the southeastern part of the United States, so Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. So my family came from Alabama. And on my dad's side were Pawnee. So they were originally on the East Coast. So his people were in Hampton, Virginia. But then that tribe was moved out towards the prairies. So you'll find the Pawnee out that way now.
So it's on both sides. For some reason, I had the feeling before I read your bio, I thought it was only on one side. So you have it on your mom and your.
It is on both sides. I'm definitely more connected to my mom's side. Many tribes in Canada, but also here in the United States, or other way around, here in Canada, but there in the United States, are matrilineal. Okay. And so it came down through my mom's side is the side that I'm more connected with.
Now, are there a lot? You know what? Just for not even ignorance, for lack of knowledge, right? What percentage would you say? Is that something you know? Or
that is a tricky question. Yeah.
See what you know.
I can tell you the percentage, but before I tell you that, let me say that's one of those hard questions for people like me, because blood quantum, which is what you're referring to, was actually a tool used by colonialists to identify someone else for them, basically trying to wean out the indigenous aspect, right? Okay. And so I am 1/8 indigenous together, right? From both sides. What happened is my great grandmother on my mother's side was full-blood Choctaw. And she married a black man, and they had a child, and that's Grandma Nettie. I remember meeting her. She was elderly, but Grandma Nettie. Grandma Nettie. I won't say what they said about her, but anyway, Grandma Nettie married a black man.
Okay.
And they had a child who was my grandfather, Edward. Yeah. And Edward had a daughter who is my mother, and my mother had me. Okay. So according to Can I say the white man's laws? I am.
You can say anything you want to say. We call real talk.
All right. Well,
yeah.
so according to the white man's laws, I am the last generation that can register for benefits, according to the U.S. government.
Okay.
The connection that I have, so a lot of people are like, well, you can't prove that.
Okay.
Actually, I can because of, so they tried to do something evil, but it worked out for good. It's called the Dawes Roll. It was when they signed the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, when my people gave up their territory, which was coerced and not done according to our traditions, and under alcohol, the influence of alcohol.
Yeah.
So it was just bad all around. But they ended up doing like a census of all of the indigenous folks from that area. And they said, okay, these people are full blood, and these people are half blood, and these people are quartered, so we're going to put them on this roll. And they had slaves too, right? So some of these tribes. So they said, okay, and these people are freedmen, which they're kind of indigenous, but not really. So Grandma Mary, who was the first Choctaw that we know of in our family, she's on the Dawes Roll by blood, 100% by blood. And so I can claim that through her lineage.
You seem well versed in your history, right?
A lot of work.
All right. And, the last couple of weeks we've been asking the question, how important is knowing your history? So you're so well versed in it. I'm going to ask you that question. How important is it for not just for every generation to understand their history?
Yeah. So one of the things that I say is creator writes our story, right? Yeah. And I was given this heritage on purpose, right? To bless the rest of the world, to bless the communities around me. And if I don't know my story, how can I operate in those gifts, right? Also, if you don't know who you are, you're going to let someone else define you. And so
I'm going to have you stop right there and repeat it, because this is probably one of the most important reasons why you should know your history. Like I said, I've been asking this question for the last couple of weeks, right? So repeat that for me.
Yeah, if you don't know who you are, if you don't know your story, someone else will define who you are for you. They tried that when they brought us across the water on the boats. But because of that connection with our ancestral land, with our culture, with community, we said, okay, even though you try to strip away who we are, we remain who we are. We know who we are. And that's from the indigenous side, and that's from the African side. Self-determination, Kujichagulia, is so important because it allows us to be who we are without having to transform into something else we weren't intended to be.
Okay. Now, in terms of history, you're from the States. You're here in London, Ontario. Mm-hmm. Do you think you know more? I should say this. I'm actually comparing countries in a sense.
Okay.
Do you think, as an American, you tend to know more of your history than you think Canadians know? You spend a fair bit of time here. Do you think we in Canada know our history as much as they do in America?
That's a good question, and I think the answer is it depends on who you're talking to, right?
On an average, no. On an average, that's where I'm going with this. On an average. One student, one person. You walk down the streets. You go somewhere in the States. You ask a black person their history. Right? You ask a black person their history somewhere in Canada. Let's say in London.
Okay, so we're talking about black folks, right?
Black, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not worried about everybody.
Yeah.
Because we know that history. I'm talking about black history. Let's say let's say you were to stop you're walking down the street. You stop somebody in London, Ontario. You said, "Listen, tell me your history." Right? Mm-hmm. Where are you from in the States? You already said it, Alabama.
Well, that's where my ancestors were from. She actually had to run. So I was born in Virginia.
Yeah.
My dad's people are still in Virginia.
Okay.
But I lived for 10 years in North Carolina.
Okay, so in North Carolina, let's say London, North Carolina. You stop somebody in London. You say, a black person in London. You say, okay, do you know your history? Same thing. You stop somebody in North Carolina, you say, do you know your history? What do you think? Yeah, what do you think it's going to be?
I mean, I feel where you're going.
No, I'm just saying, no, I'm not going anywhere. I'm asking a question, trying to get an answer.
I think here so yes, I would say generally speaking, Black Americans will know more of their history there because there's been a push. We had the civil rights movement, and like it was beat into us, sometimes literally, right? Like you need to know your history because this is all what is going on, or right? Here in Canada, I think the Black experience for Afro-Canadians, like folks that came up through, they know their history because they're very proud of having escaped from slavery or having come up into Canada. I think that folks from different places, so Afro-Caribbeans and people like Africans from the motherland, like they know their particular story. But in terms of the Black experience in Canada, like Black history, Black Canadian history, I don't think it's talked about as much, unfortunately. And so, no, I don't think people would be able to say, oh, this is, in some ways, part of that is because it's been swept under the rug. Yeah. It seems like here in Canada, there's a veneer of, we didn't have that. That was Americans.
Okay.
But I'm learning that is not the case.
Yeah, we touched on that a lot last year. In our podcast about the fact that not only the conservatism of everything, but the fact that it's like there's certain of us, or there are some of us that if you were to talk to them and say certain things happen, they have no clue. And furthermore, they don't want to know to a certain extent because it kind of shakes their whole well-being, right? But every February, I like to touch on these because it's so important for us to understand that history is important, right? Show me your past, right? Yeah. I'll tell you your future. Okay. What would you change? And I know that, you know what, this is sounding more like an interview than a real talk, but that's why these are called conversations. What would you change in London, Ontario? You've been here for a while. You know how it is in this. You know how you had it there. What would you change?
I think I would give more exposure to the assets of the Black community here in London to the larger London community, right? But I think there's a lot of gifts and talents and excellence that is held in the variety of Black cultures here that the larger London community just doesn't know about. Or in some ways doesn't want to know about. But if we make ourselves known, right? So for instance, with the Soconi markets being in Covent Garden, right? Like people are like, oh, where'd all these Black folks come from? Like, look at this beautiful art. Like, look at these beautiful products that people are making. The white community is seeing that. They're forced to see that we are here and that we have these beautiful talents and gifts. So I think that's something I would change.
You bring up the market, right? And so I'm going to go on a different tip. Do you think we appreciate each other and the stuff and the things that we're doing? So when the market happens, right? And yes, you see the white exposure. They're coming in. They're saying, "Oh wow, we're learning something," right? Do you see the same amount of Black representation?
No, this is real talk. No, I don't. I think that the average Black person here in London, who is not the vendor, who is not the artisan, who is not the historian, who is not the videographer or DJ, like the average person needs to go out and support more, honestly. That is, dare I say, a rebuke to the community. Like, we need to be supporting each other more. That said, I feel that the way that the community has drawn together to support each other, I've lived in lots of different places, and I don't think I've experienced it as much as I have here in London. And I think part of that is because it's such a small community, but it's an amazing thing. But yeah, I think the the black community needs to come out when they're doing shows at the Grand or at the Aeolian or whatever. Like, y'all need to come out, come out and support the folks.
Compared to North Carolina. Compared
to North Carolina, if someone says that there's a step show,
yeah,
or that there's a new black movie that's come out, everybody is going to go. Now, to be fair, like population-wise, there's a lot more people.
No, and I'm going to deal with it on the percentage, not on the fact that there's 100,000 people.
Everybody's going to go
in North Carolina. I'm talking about the actual terms of support.
Yeah.
It's not a numbers in terms of overall numbers. It's a percentage thing.
Yeah.
There's 30% of the black population turnout. There's 10% of the black population turnout. Whereas in London, Ontario, is it 1%? Is it 2%? Is it 3% that support? Is it 10? What are the numbers are?
I'll tell you a quick story. So last summer during I think it was Sunfest or one of those things, Lorraine Clausen,
yes,
an amazing singer, comes from like legendary family in South Africa. She was performing, and I got tickets, and I went. For some reason, my wife and daughter couldn't go, so I was by myself. I walked in. I was all excited to hear this South African music. And I walked in, and I looked around, and I was like, where are the black people?
All right. But I'm going to talk to you a minute on that, right? So is some of that, right, could be because South African music isn't as exposed here. Right? So I'm gonna come off of that just for a second. It's not as exposed. Piano and all that stuff is now really making its way, right? To this part of the world, right? Afrobeats has been running for a couple of years now. It's been the big thing, and so that's exposed more African artists here. Right.
I gotta push back though, okay, right? Like, even if you hadn't heard a single note come out of her mouth, when they saw that there was a black female singer.
No, that doesn't do it in London, Ontario. They have to.
That's what I'm saying, though.
They have to know who the person is and who the music is.
No, right? that's what I'm saying. We need to.
Yeah.
We need to be supporting.
So you're trying to say we just gotta support because.
Because.
Is that a good enough reason, though?
I think so, right? Like when we were in the village in Africa, and they were pounding corn and singing their songs, and everybody came around and celebrated. They celebrated just because, right? When somebody came from another village and they laid out the cow skins in honor and celebration, it didn't matter who it was, just because hospitality was a thing, right? And so when we look at that being transported across the ocean, it's like we still need to support each other just because. I might not like your music, but I should be hanging out just because I support you as a brother.
And I love that point. So here's what we're gonna do with that point. I'm gonna get Michelle and Big T over there to write this down. Should we support each other just because? And we're going to drop a podcast around it, and we're going to put that question out there. In fact, I believe we're going to start putting that specific question out on Facebook and social media in the next week.
All right.
And what I want to see is I want people's actual reaction. I want their opinions, right? And then we're going to bring it back to a podcast. And on that podcast, we're going to have the phone lines open. People, if you don't watch anything else in this podcast, I want you to pay attention to this and take this in. Should we support each other just because? That's it. And we're just going to hold it right there. But let you hold that thought right there.
All right.
We're going to bring it back. I'm going to invite you back. I think I know we've got some stuff to do for I think it's International Women's Month and stuff, but we're gonna get that. We're gonna get that piece of conversation going and bring you back, right?
All right.
Now I'm gonna get back a little bit to the history. You're fortunate enough to have double history. There's so many similarities between our histories, the black history and the indigenous history. Tell me something that jumps out the most.
Yeah, so Choctaw folks were incredibly generous. It was one of the things they were known for. They were also scrupulous,
Yeah.
right? So they amassed enough corn that they got everybody from around coming to buy stuff from
Yeah.
them. But they were incredibly generous, right? And so, like, there's a monument in Ireland because Choctaw folks had sent a gift of whatever money they had after they walked the Trail of Tears. They heard there was a famine, so they gave out of their small portion to Ireland. So there's this monument to Choctaw generosity across the ocean, right? Black folks are also incredibly generous, right? And this idea of your family is like, I might not know you, right, but your family, we're going to take care of each other.
Yeah.
Those are shared values that from opposite sides of the ocean, from the motherland and from Turtle Island, that have come together. And so I try to live into that. I try to make my ancestors proud on both sides by being incredibly generous, because that was something that was gifted to them.
Okay. So we got to talk about, when you talk about the good, we also got to talk about the bad. Is there anything that's put you in conflict with your two sides?
Oh, yes. So the Choctaw were one of the 5 civilized tribes, right? And what that meant in the United States was that they followed and were able to mimic what white folks were doing. And so they did that in slavery as well. Like, the Choctaw owned slaves. And so for me, I have this tension as someone who is black and someone who is Choctaw. That's like, this tension within me. It's like, do I celebrate this side of my culture? No, I don't. I know that my ancestors didn't own slaves because she married a black man, and you wouldn't marry a slave. Like, that just doesn't work. There's also the tension because within Choctaw community, I mentioned the freedmen, right? These slaves that were then freed, and they were not given citizenship in the Choctaw Nation initially. They were like, they're second-class citizens, and they had to fight for that. And so when people look at me when I say I'm Choctaw, they're like, oh, you're Choctaw freedmen, because you're black, right? You must not be. And so then I have to fight for my identity. On one side, I'm not indigenous enough, and on one side, I'm not black enough, whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
And so that tension within me, that's part of the negative side. But as my indigenous elders from here, Dr. Terry LeBlanc, Ray Aldred, like all these folks, they have taught me that we have to look at asset-based assessment. We become better people because of the gifts that our ancestors were given, and those gifts actually will help to fix the messed up stuff, the brokenness in our communities.
Are there a lot of Choctaw black folks in Canada, in this area?
I haven't met any, so if you're out there, please let me know.
Right?
No, I haven't met any.
Okay, so you're literally like the first and the only.
Maybe. I don't want to claim that because there might be. Choctaw have spread out all over the U.S. anyway. But as far as have I met any, no. And I'm trying to learn the language, right? And so I don't have anyone to practice with. So if there are Choctaw here in London, please do come find me.
Okay, so let's take it beyond the tribe then. Have you met any mixed indigenous and black folks in around?
Yeah, actually, I got to shout out a vendor from the Saucony market I met. Clean Hands, Dirty Minds, or whatever. So that sister is a mixed indigenous. And in fact, you know what? She might be Choctaw because she said her family was from Alabama as well. I think she came up through Michigan or wherever. But she is the first mixed indigenous black person that I have met here. There have been there are some folks on Instagram that I have followed that are Cree, mixed with Cree. I guess there's a black community up that way, and so that was encouraging, right? See somebody, it's like, oh, they share my story in some ways, but no, there's not a whole lot of us.
Okay. Now, as we continue along with the history lessons and I gotta ask: is coming from North Carolina and coming to Canada and coming specifically to London, Ontario, is there something that has disappointed you in the way we go about our things in London?
That's a good question.
Lifestyle. We already touched on one where we talked about the support system. And I think in a roundabout way, I'm asking, what could we do better? What could we improve on?
Yeah, I think the personal connections could go better, right? So we support each other in the public sphere, but what happens in our homes, right? So if you meet somebody and you make this connection, invite them to your house. Invite them to eat. We talk about like fellowship around the table. There's something that happens when we eat together. Yeah. It's why when people would come to the village, they would make a feast, right? Like,
but is that more of an indigenous thing, or is that?
Yeah, no, I'm talking African village, right? Like,
all right.
But yes, and on the indigenous side as well. But from the African standpoint, it's like there's something that happens when we eat together. There's an intimacy that happens when we eat together, and I haven't found that yet in London on a personal level. It might be happening in places. I know that a dear sister friend of ours, she's from Zimbabwe, invited us into her home with her mom and dad and taught us how to eat salsa correctly, and it was an amazing experience. But there should be more of that happening here in North Carolina. If you knew somebody for more than 5 minutes, you're gonna be at the family cookout, right? So
now I'm glad you brought up the Zimbabwe connection, right? Because the one thing I didn't do was send a big shout out to Angel over at the Fix Hair Salon. That's one of the places where we actually shoot. And not only that, Angel is also one of our hosts here on Real Talk. So big shout out.
Right.
And then I'm going to keep it with this.
Maita.
With the Zimbabwe Talk, we've got Silence from the Black History Coordinating Committee. And then, of course, my big dude, DJ Jose. Whole big Zimbabwe family, right? So let me send a shout out to the Zimbabwe. And I'm glad you brought it up and kept me on my toes. I'm still going to come back and talk about differences and things. And one of the other differences that I want to talk about is there seems to be a difference in terms of the African experience compared to the Canadian or the North American experience. And I'm even going to go farther and say that sometimes it's like there's certain, especially among the older Africans, there seems to be such a disconnect from the North American, Afro. There's such a disconnect. Sometimes it feels like they don't want to mix. And I know we're already tribal because when you come from Jamaica, you don't want to talk to you're like this, I'm this, and you're from Barbados and it's like this, and you're from Trinidad and it's like this. But there seems to be even a bigger separation when it's African and it's everybody else. At one point, I read an article that said, well, one of the reasons is that certain Africans, I'm not saying, and once again, this is not all Africans or anything like that, I'm just drawing some points that said that North Americans were enslaved at some point, so there's a certain inferiority complex that should happen and all that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know that I have enough experience with that aspect from the African experience coming here as immigrants. I know that there is definitely a difference between the immigrant experience and those who are born here, even if their parents were immigrants. And thinking about when we're talking about black folks, you have to break it down, right? So you have people whose culture was created. African American culture did not exist before.
Could have existed before.
Exactly, right? And so you have African Americans, which have this kind of American background, but then you have Afro-Canadians, which some of them came up as loyalists, right?
Yeah.
And so loyalists versus people that came up out of rebellion, like that's a different experience. Then you have Afro-Caribbeans, right? So my wife is Haitian Canadian.
Okay.
So we're the same color, but we are not the same culture at all, right? And her parents were born in Haiti, right? So she was born in Montreal. Very different experience.
Yeah, because Haiti, if you don't know the politics of Haiti, Haiti went through a few dictators. Haiti is considered
They've gone through it, boy.
The poorest country in that sphere in the Caribbean. It's considered the poorest country. And if you follow world news right now, Canada is giving support to Haiti because it's all blocked in. The government is kind of like destabilized since the last assassination. They're not the president now, but
don't get me started.
was assassinated,
Yeah.
right? There's some that decided that they'd like to see a police force go there, and there's some that didn't because the last time there was outside police involved, there was crimes. So they say no, don't bring it. But Canada has sent military vehicles, and America has given a little bit of assistance, and the president of Haiti has been asking for there to be an international police force. That's where I wanted to go with this.
Right.
An international police force.
Right.
There is one particular gang, I think they call him Jimmy Cozier or something like that. He's been blockading. At one point, even the ports were blockaded, right? They lifted it, so they've been able to get food in and stuff, but it's a seriously terrible situation.
It is a mess. But even so, this is where I was talking about. Like, we can look at how bad things are in Haiti, and it's true, right?
Yeah.
Like it's bad, but the riches that are there, the resources that are there. So it's like we from the outside we look at Haiti and we say, oh, it's the poorest country. But when I went, before all of the craziness happened, when I went there, I was like,
wait, there was a time
what? Yeah, yes, right. Like, but we don't hear about that.
Yeah.
Right? That's a whole other conversation. But anyway, there was unbelievable riches in that place, but it's all exported because they're not allowed to keep things for themselves.
Who's not allowed? Hold on. Then you got to get technical and say who's not allowed, because there's a certain percentage that will control all of the resources.
You try to get me in trouble. I can't get in trouble.
That's called real talk.
Yeah,
right?
No.
If we're gonna go there, then if we're gonna go on that tangent, why does it seem to be that in black-run countries, right? And I'm not even gonna go there, but in a lot of black-run countries, the ruling party or the ruling government or whatever you have it.
Oh man, I feel it. I feel where it's going.
Why can I not say that's why
it's colorism? It's colorism, right? Like,
is it? Right.
Yeah, and this is from an anthropological standpoint.
Yes.
This happens across the globe.
Yes.
And we don't know why, but the lighter you are, the higher up the power structure thing you have.
Not only, but in so many countries, right? Beautifully rich countries, right? Have the capacity to make $1 trillion. But out of that $1 trillion, 990 billion of it is going to get stolen, or it's going to end up in where it's not supposed to end up. So we've got 5 rich people, super rich people, right? And 1 billion poor people. Because unofficially, there's so many billionaires in Africa, right? And they can't even get counted on the Forbes because of how the money, was accumulated.
Yeah. Man, we're a long way from the question, though.
Should I just leave it?
Yeah. It's hard, but the issue of the experience,
yes,
right?
That's good.
All of that influences the way that my wife lives her life here in Canada, which is very different than the way I lived my life here in Canada as a more recent immigrant. by choice. I didn't come through a refugee camp. I didn't have that experience, right?
Yeah.
Where my brothers and sisters from various places in Africa have, right? And so all of that causes us to look at this country in a very unique way, through a distinct lens. Even though we're the same color, we don't have the same experience. And so I try to be respectful and let people tell their story, right? Back to the question of, like, you got to know your story. Let people tell their story, to share their experience, and then to honor that, right? And part of that comes from my indigenous heritage, right? You honor people's stories as if it was a treasure, right? Whenever someone is sharing a story with you, I say I put it in my bundle. And I carry that with honor and respect. And I don't think we've learned that as much.
And I was just about to go there. How often do we listen to one another's stories and carry them with us and acknowledge it?
Yeah, we don't, because, unfortunately, because we've gotten selfish, right? Like, we have moved away from that communal aspect that identified us in the villages in Africa, that was brought over. We've gotten too comfortable in some sense, right? And so I got me and mine, and so I'm okay.
Yeah.
But we need to get back to that place of recognizing us as a community and celebrating the various parts of the community, those stories. That the library, the thing at the library was a beautiful expression of that, right? Expression. You had so many different expressions of blackness represented there in that place, and all of it was celebrated, which, again, we need more of that.
Not only that, but we need the support as well, because if you look at it, how many black families were there, right? It's out there, but what did they have? 100 people maybe, right? 100 people, beautifully put together. Once again, big shouts to the London Library. I was so impressed with the singing, the children's choir.
Yeah, London Children's Gospel Choir.
Yes. People, if you get a chance, London Children's Gospel Children's Choir is around. If you ever get a chance, listen to them. It's a beautiful experience.
Yeah.
But it still comes back. Here we have Saturday afternoon. It wasn't too cold outside. It was all right.
You said no excuse.
I'm not saying no excuse. What I'm saying is it's not too cold. It wasn't too cold outside. But yet still the representation. Certain things like that, you don't want to see more white people than black people. Even if they're the majority, you still want to see so much representation from us. Do we run away from culture?
I don't know. What do you think it is? Like, why? What is keeping? I mean, is it work? Like, people have to work, or is it survival?
Priorities. Priorities. If your parents didn't make it a priority to tell you these things and tell you about then how are you going to make it a priority? How do you get it in the mindset that, oh, I got to do this, right? For my kids or just for me or anything, when it wasn't done for you?
Though I wonder, so like in the Haitian community, Haitian Montreal community, I'll say that specific because that's the one I know, right? I wonder if they didn't feel a need to go out into the community and do Black History things because they were doing it at home, right? There was a distinct Haitian, like, you are Haitian. You're going to do things the Haitian way, right? And I had to learn that marrying into this family.
Yeah.
So I wonder if here in London, like, the Nigerian families are hanging out with the Nigerian families and they're doing it in their homes, right? The Trinidadians are hanging out with the Trinidadians. And so this sense of, because I'm comparing it, here's why I'm saying this. I'm thinking about my experience in North Carolina. The majority of Black people in North Carolina are African Americans.
Yes.
And so when we say we need to do Black history, we have
it's a consensual Black
exactly.
It's a consensual Black history. It's not Black history, like you said, from Haiti or from Trinidad or from Guyana.
Exactly.
Jamaica, right? They fully bought into their history.
Right.
But Canada, we're still segregated into our little groups.
Right.
So that and so that our history is whatever. And kids coming up might not want to know my parents' history because it's their history, it's not my history. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
And so it's not passed on, or even still, the importance of it is not passed on. So, okay, so you tell my kid might not want to know what their history is, but I never passed on and said, well, you know what, you gotta learn a little bit of history, you gotta know who you are, you gotta do this, and it's not talked about in that sense, right? So, do we blame our parents?
Well, I mean, blaming never helps anything. So,
Blame it on
yeah. I mean, the reality is, I think we have to focus on how do we fix it.
Yeah.
Right. So there's an intentionality. There was a brother. He's a white brother who was married to a black woman who had a little boy. Right. Who was mixed, and his wife wasn't there, but he said, "I really want to make sure that my kid knows his history." Right. There was an intentionality that was there. I think once we begin to push our communities, push our own families towards that intentionality of like, okay, we are creating a collective, what did you say, consensus black history here, which is beautiful. It's made up of all of these different pieces, but when we begin to grasp hold of that consensus piece, then I think it's like a snowball. Yeah. We'll start to see more and more representation. But until that point, if everyone's just focused on their own little, I hate to say ghettoized expression,
but
then
how much of that is also because of economics, right? Because listen, when I'm hustling trying to make this ends right here, I'm not thinking about I have to teach history or let my kids know because I'm so concentrated on making my ends meet.
Right.
So we've got the economic side. For a younger generation, it's a status thing too. Right? My Zimbabwe dudes might hang with my Zimbabwe dudes and talk thing. But when they come across, they're not talking that stuff because nobody else is talking outside, right?
Right.
They're talking in the circle, in the closeness, like you said, at home. But when we go out, nobody else is talking it, so I'm not going to be the one guy that talks it and gets looked on like, who is that?
Right. But that's where, so from the Black American experience, it was, he said, I think it was James Brown, he was like, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, right? Like, that mantra had to be told to the generations so that when we went out, we didn't feel the shame of, I'm black, and I gotta hide, right?
Oh, you call it shame? We're going to touch on that for a minute.
Well, I mean, it was self-protection. I mean, like, it's complicated, right? But the situation here where people are like, well, I don't want to speak my language because other people might look funny at me, right? If they had a say it loud, I'm Zimbabwean, whatever it is, then maybe they wouldn't, the youth, I'm saying, like, the youth wouldn't feel that same reticence to claim their heritage.
So now I'm going to go on two sides of the story, right? Just because I want to touch on all sides. Afro-Canadian. And I'm in London, Ontario. Especially, I'm going to go back to London, let's say 15 years ago, 20 years ago, something happens. Do I want to jump up and say I'm black and I'm proud? Then I'm going to say, okay, I'm an immigrant and I'm coming here and I look around and there's this, that, and the other. Do I want to say, yo, I'm black and I'm proud?
So as I am learning more about London black history, I am realizing that there was an era, right, the late 1800s, early 1900s, where there was a thriving black community.
Yeah, but I talked to you.
They were proud.
Right. Hold on. But you're talking not so much 19, but 18s. And you're talking probably before the Ku Klux Klan got here.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry for that, y'all. The Americans exported that up here.
Yeah,
That's busted.
before they came, right? They came, right? Because I think last year I talked on the fact that there was a black apothecary here that opened up. I forget the name of the family. Two brothers. They opened, one had a fruit store, one had the first apothecary in London. And
Wow.
for those that don't know apothecary, it's a pharmacy.
Yeah.
Modern day pharmacy, right? And they were doing good for a while. I think it was until about 1867, a little bit around there. Then the Ku Klux Klan came in and things started to go downhill.
Yeah.
Had a great conversation with, is it O'Neill? I believe it's O'Neill, guy from the O'Neill Funeral Homes. He gave me a little bit about the history because he said one of the first black people that settled in London that escaped, that came from the South and came here was buried in the same cemetery as the KKK Grand Chief.
Wow.
Right? And
Wow.
he knew that because his great-great-great-grandfather, they've always been in the cemetery business, right? So he told me
Wow.
that, right?
Wow.
So there's that dynamic that's always been in London. But I'm not even really going to touch back on that old racism kind of stuff because I think I've covered it so much in terms of our podcast and stuff. I'm just talking about, I want to bring it into last 10 years of stuff, right? Because there's a certain amount of people that, there was a time when you go out and you looked around London and you definitely weren't seeing a whole lot of black people in London. It's gotten a whole lot better, right? The impact of which is that if you're working in wherever and you're surrounded and there's only two of you, you're not going to want to be part of the black movement at that time. Right?
Though I will say, if there's only two of you in the room and you see that other person across the room, you are going to nod or wave or recognize, I see you, right?
Sometimes. But that's sometimes because you come to London, especially in London, Ontario, and you're looking at it and you want to get ahead and stuff, right? And do I identify as pro-black, right? Which might not get me to where I want to, or do I just keep quiet? Right?
Which, is that okay? I mean, I would say it's not, right? That I have to hide who I am. I understand, like, to get where I need to go.
You sit down and rationalize it and go for dinner, or sit down over the dinner table and say, wait, you know, a minute, I'm hiding who I am. It just comes in and the pattern develops and some are so oblivious to it, right? It just kind of takes hold and you just do what you do. And not really sit down and think and go, well, I'm doing this and it's hurting the next person. It's going to hurt who comes after me. But I got to survive and that's what it is. And, you know, let me blend in and let me do what. And it's not like and that's part of you know, that gets back into the old conservative stuff. You know, when you don't have something to fight for and against, it kind of messes you up in a way, right? And I've always said this about the Canadian experiences, that there was nothing to fight for. And so it made for a docile experience, if I got to use the word.
Interesting.
Right?
Interesting. Yeah.
A docile experience.
I can see that. But I also, so this is where I can only come from my American lens, right? So we as Americans, coming from a country that was birthed out of rebellion, right? Like versus Canada, which came from the crown and tradition, and right, don't rock the boat. Right, like that's the thing, and so that's a different type of rocking the boat. Valentine's Day, but yeah, I think that there is something to be said about that part of the culture, right? And people coming into this country are coming into that culture that's already like, don't make waves, right? Like you just. The problem with that is that the perception of this country and what's purported by those who are moving and shaking and making the culture what it is that Canada is this great mosaic. And so we celebrate all of these different pieces. And then if we're sitting back and saying, well, I'm not going to share my piece because I got to get ahead, well, now there is a disconnect from what the country actually is saying and what the country is actually living.
Well said. Yeah, I kind of, but it also depends on the cultures that you come from. Let's look at Jamaican culture for a minute, right? One thing that can be said about Jamaican culture is that it exports its culture wherever it goes, and there's a certain set of not a warish mentality, but of a certain assertive mentality. We're from Jamaica. We know who we are. We go here. This is who we are. This, and we're gonna fight for this, and we're gonna. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And some of it doesn't. It doesn't translate to other cultures that come here as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you look at Haitian culture, they are very proud. They're like, we were the first ones. We were the first ones, right? And then you get some other cultures that were under other colonial rule that are more docile, in a sense, right? Like,
and this is we're not trying to talk badly of any culture or anything. We're just looking at the differences between and saying, hey, this is what actually happens and this is how.
And for me, I'm looking at the trickle-down effect.
The trickle-down
right?
effect, yes.
And so when you look at people here now, youth, right, that are coming out, and they're trying to figure out, okay, do I stand up and say, I am black and I'm proud, whatever expression of black it is, or do they sit back and say, I gotta survive?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
well, they say I gotta survive, and also they say, well, you know what, that kind of talk is for the old heads. Right? Because the new talk, right? If you pick up and you watch, what are the youth talking about? They're talking about the relevant things to them this day, not history in the terms of, well, you know, because it looks like a beaten path, right? Like, we beat this down year after year, blah, 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 blah. There's always that. But we don't want to talk about that because everything is good for us because my parents made things good for us. So what we want to talk about is life.
Until they experience what those old heads are talking about. Okay. So you get to certain universities, and they're like, oh, wait a minute. They said what about us from up front in the classroom? Or there's underrepresentation that is not even close to what is happening, right? Like,
so now it breaks up because you took it on a university level, but then what happens to the regular, the non-university?
Okay, so they go out and try to get a job, and they realize that you didn't get this job because of the color of your skin. They didn't have to experience. Life was good. But when they get out and experience the reality of the brokenness that's out there, then they're faced with it, right? And, I mean, I would hate, my daughter's 8, right? She's 8 years old, and she's already had some issues where we've had to teach her, like, no, you be proud of who you are. But I would hate to say, one day you're going to experience something that's going to make you realize you are black. You are a black woman, right? But it's going to happen because it's the world that we live in. And she will have to face society and make some tough decisions based on that.
Militant words. I'm going to call it.
It's reality. It's hard. It's hard. But would you say real talk?
Real talk.
So, yeah.
You know what? An hour's come up and it's like crazy when the conversation starts to go. So I'm going to start to wrap it up. Remember, though, we got a conversation to come back to.
All right.
We're going to bring it
just
back.
Because.
Just because. Do we support each other just because? Does there have to be a criteria to support? So people, we're going to have this conversation in March. We're going to pick the date. We want you to chime in on this. Do you just support black people because each other just because? Like I said, I want to hear from you. This is Real Talk, Straight Talk. Hit us up on IG. Hit us up on Facebook. On Facebook, we're True Evolution and all that stuff. Got to say a big shout out once again to our sponsors and Our biggest sponsor right now is the Essence and Culture Awards. I haven't talked about it. Let me talk about it. Coming up this weekend, celebrating Black achievement. No better way to say it. Black achievement. This weekend at the Aeolian Hall, Sunday afternoon. 5 to 6 is cocktail hour. 6 to 9 is the award ceremony. You're going to be there. You're doing the land acknowledgement. Got a set of performers. London Gospel Collective, Casper, Solo YT, The Finesser. I don't want to leave anybody out, but I don't forget people. Mark Smith, of course. Big Lou Crew. Raina is going to be there as well. I hope I didn't leave anybody out. Sunday Ajax. Here's history in the making. The very first Black president of Western Student Council, USC. Got nominated, won the nomination last night. I got a text from my good dude, James, and he's like, Sunday won. And then today sometime, Josie sent me Sunday won. Yes, Sunday Ajax. So big shout out to Sunday Ajax. He's going to be on Real Talk next week. And we're going to talk about not only issues, but being the first Black president of Western's Student Council. I want to know what he hopes to accomplish and all that. That's why there's Real Talk, right? So that's a historical moment, right? Right, so once again, I'm going to get back to my sponsors. Thank you to Angel from the Fixed Hair Salon, to the Wien Community Center, of course, Up Like 7 Barbershop, Paranoid Bar and Grill, Pride, Rhythm Movements Community Association in Ottawa, and of course Soul Kitchen Radio in Hamilton. Coming back again to Essence and Culture this weekend. If you haven't got your ticket yet, it's $45. Great cause. Entertainment galore. Big shouts to my man, Mr. Fresh. He's going to be on video and doing all kinds of stuff. Hosted by London's very own Jennifer Slay and Stephen D. Emilio. And on that, and you know what? You know what they say? You save the best for last. Last year we had the most incredible DJ. He did a Shaggy rendition, so we had to bring him back. In fact, we probably bring him back for the next 10 years just because of that rendition, right? Big shout out to DJ Party. He's going to be doing his thing, right? Essence of Culture this Saturday, this Sunday, and I'll see you. We call this a Fade to Black, right? We out!
On the beat. On the beat.